Today's video is about the concept of spiritual bypassing and what that actually means. I'm also going to touch on the idea of toxic positivity, air quotes. What is spiritual bypassing? Well, usually when we're talking about this idea, the first thing I want to say is this often comes up from a place of judgment. We see someone spiritually bypassing, we're essentially saying they're trying to skip a step. They're trying to skip a step, and they're trying to jump through things quicker, or skip the hard work, or someone or ourselves are purposefully negating the nitty-gritty. What is spiritual bypassing actually? It just speaks to unawareness. If someone is spiritually bypassing per se, they are either unaware of, or from our perspective, unwilling to look at something that would help them heal or would actually bring them to the next level. At its root, the idea of and the concept of spiritual bypassing is perspective based, because we can't bypass anything. Because if there is true evolution and there is true ascension and there is true growth, then nothing can be bypassed, because vibration doesn't lie and experience doesn't lie. At its core, the concept of spiritual bypassing is never about the other person or someone else that we think is bypassing. It's always about us and how we're viewing them, how we're judging them. And so we have to recognize and understand that we're all living inside of our own experiences. And so no matter what you're viewing of someone else's experience, that may not be and probably is not the experience they're having of themselves. That is, you do not have the same perspective as them. Your version of them that you created is the one that is bypassing. We ask, what about it in you is seeing this? Why is this coming up? And generally, I think it comes up, we see it as a perceived negative thing. And so it has to do with entitlement or a frustration for someone not to be able to see something that you can see. And so there's almost like a willingness or like a wanting for these people to deal with the so-called consequences or hard work that you believe that they must do. I think these are all products of the idea of spiritual, the concept of spiritual bypassing. We just have to look at the reflection in ourselves, which is like when we see someone else, maybe they are thriving in some ways, but in other ways they're in a lot of pain or a lot of discomfort or something like that. If that bothers you, then we have to ask ourselves, like, what is it within us that is creating this version of them? Why are we seeing them this way? Why are we seeing them as skipping a step? We literally cannot skip a step. We all are exactly where we are. And we always will be, and we always have been. So there's literally nothing to bypass. There's always new things to learn. Basically, you're seeing something else in someone that you're like, this is so obvious, but from my perspective, you haven't learned this thing that I already know. Well, think about this, is there's plenty of things in your life that you don't know, that you're completely oblivious to, or you're just not interested in and you don't want to look at for two reasons. One, maybe you just don't want to look at it because you're not interested in it, or two, because you're either subconsciously or consciously not ready to go there because it's either too painful or you don't see it as of value. And to someone else, that may be incredibly obvious. The other thing too is the idea when we're seeing someone as spiritually bypassing, we're saying, hey, you, look at this really heavy negative thing. I see this really heavy negative thing in you and in your life, and you refuse to look at it. Well, why the heck should they do that? If they're bipping along and bopping along and they're happy in their own perspective, why should you force them? Why should it be of your will to get other people to look at things that they don't want to look at? That circumvents the idea of free will. So whole idea of spiritual bypassing, again, I think comes back to there is no bypassing. And how can we compassionately see these reflections of ourselves and others, and that everyone has, we could call them different wounds, but I don't even want to call it that. Everyone has different parts of them that are free and aligned, and other parts that are maybe a little bit more twisted and distorted. And how can we compassionately love those parts and see them as reflection of ourselves? There's nothing to bypass. It's not possible. This concept is built, this verbiage is built, and this is my perspective, it's built from a place of judgment. And so we should ask ourselves, why do we need other people to be perfect? Same thing, the idea of toxic positivity. If something is truly positive, it is not toxic. Toxic positivity is just another way of saying, I think that person doesn't want to look at this thing that I see as negative, or this person refuses to acknowledge these negative things. And so I'm not knocking acknowledging where you're at, because I think awareness of where we're at and actually what we have going on gives us the ability in which to decide and shift. But it is by no means our job to assert our standards of what someone else should be focusing on anyone. We can try, but that's coming from a place of lack within ourselves. There is no positivity that is toxic unless you're in a negative state. Then the more positive it is, the more it will shine the light on the toxicity that exists within you. But that toxicity isn't toxic. It's just a negative perspective. Peace and love and blessings.